A limited liability company is just a property of the Secretary of State. They are acting as the holders of that entity, and you are the holder in due course because you are going to them to get the benefit of separate personhood to limit your own liability, and in turn of them granting you that license that whenever you get that articles of association, incorporation, certificate of association or incorporation, depending on what they call it in your respective state, that is a license to do something that is otherwise unlawful, meaning you can screw someone over. Just so long as you can say that you did it in good faith, you will not be personally liable, and the entity itself will be treated as though it's alive of its own. That's modern day juju. That's modern day voodoo done on a piece of paper, a placeholder. And then they put themselves in a vulnerable position. Remember the art of war. When strong, act weak. When weak, act strong. And victory is assured. 9, to reduce the vulnerability of the United States. Meaning we're vulnerable, we're weak against this everyday man that don't even know how basic business works. They don't even know that this is a preemption of their wealth and their future and their balance and their privacy and their freedom, to which this same United States was founded based on the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. We're vulnerable from these ignorant, incompetent people. To reduce the vulnerability of the United States to wrongdoing by United States corporations, meaning you are our property when you start forming the S Corp, C Corps, LLCs, and limited liability companies with hidden owners, meaning now you cannot be private so long as your affairs intertwines with us. See, this thing is actually good because now it's forcing people to have no choice but to know how things work. Choose a side, function a certain way, or just completely lay down and be our slaves. Don't straddle the fence. All that freedom of you saying because you have an LLC, you have a business, no more of that. You want to have that entitlement? Well, show us everything. Give us everything. And we can do whatever we want. In fact, we'll even add verbiage of police power just to let you know that we will use force against you on a municipal, local level and on a federal level through our agencies. 2020 went by. 2021 went by. Everyone is still barely recovering. People who are lingering emotional issues, people with lingering relationship issues, people with lingering health issues, all of them got hit. So 2021 just went by like a snap of a finger. 2022, I realized, all right, so none of these people out here speaking about all these special stuff and all these special information, are none of these people going to speak of this? Almost 3 years have went by, and everything in their lives is about to be flipped upside down through Corporate Transparency Act, and no one is speaking of it. That's when during April, when I decided to release this video, Trust 101 508 Churches versus 501c3, all you need to know. This thumbnail. Because I realized after waiting a few years for people to begin talking about it, no one was. But it is important for people to know. Because just as much as there were stepping stones to this, this itself is a stepping stone to something else, whether people realize it or not. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back. In the 21st century, serfdom does not require a tortfeasor whacking people with a whip. There's a general and solidified confidence by the acting overlords of 21st century commerce that the average everyday man has been well groomed and conditioned enough to enslave themselves upon a nudge or prompt using contract law. The contract law being public law, the same public law meant to benefit the people by governing affairs in a manner that protects the people. The tortfeasors know that the luxury in the Western world where even a minimum wage earner can create an LLC exists for the purpose of control rather than freedom. The luxury is just an illusion of freedom. And what public law are we referring to? The bill called House Resolution 2513 within the 116th Congress first session. Now, many people, when it comes to law, they're familiar with seeing the verbiage public law so-and-so, statute so-and-so. So let's clarify something when it comes to this term, house resolution. In short, house resolution is just the terminology used depending on where a certain public law originates from the horse's mouth. United States House of Representatives. Bills and resolution. Forms of congressional action. If you are the everyday man going about minding your business, it is of the utmost importance and necessity for you to know how these things work, because these things are the origin and the sequential events of what controls your life. I'm sure you're no stranger to the verbiage that the invisible strings that controls people's lives are pen and paper. It's always said here. This is how that comes to be. Within the video regarding 16 stages of how laws are made, I went over bills and resolution, but it was part of the explanation relating to 16 stages, which the passing and proposal of bills are one of them. But here, and let's look at what bills actually mean, so that this thing called house resolution will make more sense, because on its face, it doesn't necessarily say public law so-and-so. Forms of congressional action. We know that Congress is the department of government, either on a state or federal level, that performs the legwork of creating law. Granted, one of the other ways that laws can be created is through petition by one of the people. But of course, the people have been so far asleep. The work of Congress is initiated by the introduction of a proposal in one of four principal forms: the bill, joint resolution, concurrent resolution. What we just looked at, this is called a bill. Another word for a bill, when it comes to legislative acts, the first stage of creating law, is called House resolution. Now, unless this House resolution was basically voted down upon, every verbiage here is exactly how it's going to be, per the contractual determination of the timeline of when this triggers. So this House resolution, particularly 2513, says that it triggers beginning January 2024, but it was initially proposed 2019, and there was no objection to it. At least if there were, the acceptance of it was more than the objection. So every verbiage here transitioned into exacting that's enforceable as of 2024. So nothing here is different from whatever public law they're going to give it to it, that they're going to designate to it until subsequent amendments. And right now it's so early that it's not being amended. So what is a bill? A bill is the form, meaning the format, the medium, the mannerism to which something is expressed when it comes to the initial stage of how laws are made. A bill is the form used for most legislation, meaning there are other type of legislation otherwise, which is joint, concurrent, and simple resolution. A bill is the form used for most legislation, whether permanent or temporary, meaning certain contract, aka certain legislature, that's supposed to govern certain people, can be based on a limitation of it activates now, during this time, and ends then during this time. General or special. General means it applies to everyone. Special means it applies based on a triggering mechanism such as emergency powers. And that emergency power, unbeknownst to many people, is that emergency powers are specific to a particular class of people that legislature refers to. Most don't realize that. The emergency power that took place in 2020 that's well known without us using a buzzword was the whole face mask thing. That face mask thing and the emergency powers, many don't realize that it is applicable to employees of corporations in its greatest sense, meaning you walk into an establishment All those posts that you see is not for the public. It's meant for the people working there. The public are recommended to abide by it, but are not mandated. But the employees working for that corporation, which is just an arm's length of the United States or some corporate veil, to which the 50 states make up the United States, that entity and their employees are the ones mandated. That's what this special portion of a bill is referring to. And even worse, those mandates were not legislative act, so there were no laws, there were no bills, there were no public laws passed. That's what makes it worse. But nonetheless, in the case that the special matters of emergency power, which for the most part is granted into the executive department, which is the CEO of the body politic called the United States. But in rare cases, emergency powers are granted under the legislature. And in that case, it will be temporary. That's what the executive department of each state and the United States were mimicking. Just so it's clear. And only when it's passed by the legislature through a bill, joint resolution, concurrent resolution, or simple resolution, does it in fact apply to the public at large. And if it does apply to the public at large, but under special bill, then the fact that it's a special bill would only refer to certain groups of people within public at large. If it's a general bill, then it would generally apply to everyone as a blanket unequivocally, because it's law. Whether it's permanent, it's self-explanatory. Whether it's temporary, self-explanatory. And then they're going to emphasize it by saying public or private. A bill originating in the House of Representatives is designated by the letter, quote unquote, H.R., signifying House of Representatives, followed by a number that it retains throughout all its parliamentary stages. This H.R. is what you are looking at here when you look at House Resolution H.R. These corresponding numbers is what it refers to when it says that it's followed by a number that it retains throughout all its parliamentary stage. This number is the chronological order of the different subject matters that's been proposed before it becomes public law. Given the fact that this was proposed in 2019 and it was meant to trigger this month, this year, January 2024, there's yet to be publicly available reference of public law, although it exists now if you go into the congressional records and you order it. But you might not find the documents easily on the internet yet before it begins to circulate. Bills are presented to the President for action when approved in identical forms by both House of Representatives and the Senate, meaning they both consent to it. And the one who says the final green light is the President. The one who proposes it in this instance, if it comes from the House of Representatives. Remember, the Congress is made up of two pillars, the House of Representatives and the Senate. If it comes from the House, it's called a bill. If it comes from the people, it's called a petition, which in that video thumbnail just shown, when it comes to the 16 stages, on the website of the Congress, this is the website of the House of Representatives, which is one of the pillars that make up the Congress. But on the website of the Congress, they show you and tell you in verbiage, word for word, that the people can propose a law just like the House or the Senate. Now that we're clear on what this is, House resolution. A video on 508 versus LLC was done regarding the Corporate Transparency Act, aka House Resolution 2513. And that particular first part focuses on the entities and parties that are exempt. This particular video will now go into the details of the scrutinies that people who are not exempt are liable to. In other words, all the hair in the asshole of your business affairs is going to be counted and apportioned. In summary, I will simplify it so that you don't have to read all the 101 pages of the House resolution and the 42 pages of the committee report. Now, I'll of course be uploading this along with the video so that for those of you who want to read it, just go ahead and read it. But I'll summarize it to you based on what I've read and the simplicity of what applies to most everyday average people. And you will realize that the purpose of this is actually not to focus on those who make a lot of money. The focus of it is to screw over the average man or woman who is, quote unquote, coming up. They are the primary and sole target rather than the alleged dealers of unlawful items where shelf corporations are used as mediums of exchange. What you will get generally in terms of the justification for this thing called Corporate Transparency Act is that, well, it's trying to prevent laundering from people using shelf corporations and people engaging in nefarious activities. But when you really look at the details of the structure and who it really applies to, you realize otherwise. So let's go into it. An act to ensure that persons who form corporations or limited liability companies in the United States disclose the beneficial owners of those corporations or limited liability companies in order to prevent wrongdoers from exploiting United States corporations and limited liability companies for criminal gain. That is the first intent. In other words, a constructive trust. If you've watched this video on constructive trust, you realize that a constructive trust is a type that exists for the purpose of preventing something bad from occurring. Therefore, the presumption is the one being pointed fingers at is the bad guy. In other words, guilty before innocence. That is what you literally just read. That declaration of trust, the constructive one, they just gave it to you. If you know what a constructive trust is, you would hear it through its exact verbiage. The assumption is that someone is doing something wrong to the United States. Therefore, go to the United States and tell them about everything that's going on in your life so that you don't affect them. Kiss the ring of the king. That's what's going on here. That's the first intent. Second intent, to assist law enforcement in detecting, preventing, and punishing the T word, money laundering, and other misconduct involving United States corporation and limited liability companies and for other purposes. So you might think, well, what does limited liability company has to do with United States? Remember, I told you in several videos relating to Grant and several other videos that a limited liability company is just a property of the Secretary of State. They are acting as the holders of that entity, and you are the holder in due course because you are going to them to get the benefit of separate personhood to limit your own liability, and in turn of them granting you that license that whenever you get that articles of association, incorporation, certificate of association or incorporation, depending on what they call it in your respective state, that is a license to do something that is otherwise unlawful, meaning you can screw someone over. Just so long as you can say that you did it in good faith, you will not be personally liable, and the entity itself will be treated as though it's alive of its own. That's modern day juju. That's modern day voodoo done on a piece of paper, a placeholder, an actual straw man. So normally if you do that, it's unlawful, but we just accepted this as a means, and we are God, so we say it's all right. And because we say it's all right, you can now come to us to create it, and we will license it for you, and we will give you the ability to do that by registering to us and telling us what type of business, who owns it, where it's doing business, aka a registered agent, to assume jurisdiction through minimum contact. And each state of so-and-so is what makes up United States. That's the reason why they add limited liability company into the equation, because you might be thinking, well, what does LLCs have to do with United States if I'm creating it on a Secretary of State level? Well, Secretary of State is the one who keeps the secrets of the state. Part of the secrets of the state is that they are licensing people to do things whereby they're creating fictions, and they are allowing it, and they're getting fees for allowing that protection, like the kingpin. That's what's going on. And because they allow you that protection and you're giving them fees, they say you must pay us some taxes and other stuff that comes along with it in the future. The other stuff that comes along with it in the future, this is one of it. And if you're doing S Corps and C Corp, that is the mimicry. S Corps and C Corps is also good when it comes to how you want to transfer or have money pass through one way or the other. Aside from limiting your liability, your monies can be held separately through the entity itself or through you. See, LLCs is just for the purpose of being sued. But when it comes to taxability, it's just a pass through. It goes to its members or to its managers. Simple as that. But S Corps and C Corps get taxed differently. They get separate tax advantage on top of certain types of limited liabilities, which we'll not go into here because we don't want to deviate too far. And of course, since the state of so-and-so, which you're going to establish these S Corps, C Corps, LLCs, make up the United States by default, United States corporation comes into play in the financial interest, because the states that you are given. The complete 1 hour and 9-minute video is posted on the Patreon page. Take care. Best of luck.